Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hello again, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and we want to welcome all of you who are watching from around the world, whether you're doing so on TV through your cable or network provider or on your phone using the portable TV app, which is just a click away. We're going to begin our newscast today with what is nothing short of an astonishing change of course in U.S. foreign policy. Look, if we take the U.S. envoy to Syria at his word right now, that long-held demand that, quote, Assad must go is no longer in effect. Think about that. For more than 10 years, the words, the expression, Assad must go, has been the U.S. mantra. Our official policy has been to push for regime change as well as the removal of President Bashar al-Assad. Why? Well, because he's been accused of using chemical weapons by the only independent arbiters in the Syrian war, a group that's called the White Helmets. But here's the problem with that. A closer look has revealed that the White Helmets are really not so independent. They may be arbiters, but they're not independent. And two, the accusations of chemical weapons usage, that too did not really hold up to scrutiny. In fact, look at that video right there. You see that? It's said to purport victims being treated from a chemical attack. Guess what? A BBC producer on the scene later came forward after the 2018 video was shot to reveal that this is fake. That scene is staged to make it look like a hospital scene after a chemical attack that apparently never really happened. See, the problem all along for the United States' credibility, say some Middle East experts, is that our State Department may have revealed its intentions, shown its hand, as we like to say, maybe a little too early. We picked a side right after the Syrian conflict, and in many cases, some would argue that we actually fomented, created the conditions for this violent civil war that followed. But now a representative of the United States State Department, think about it, a representative, the envoy from the U.S. State Department to Syria is saying that that is no longer necessary. What does that mean? Does that mean that the United States is now backing Assad? No. No. Far from it. But for a U.S. envoy to say that after more than a decade of attacks against the Syrian government, that its controversial president can now stay, Assad can stay, that is what we would call in journalism a screaming headline, one that we here on the News with Rick Sanchez can simply not pass up. Not if we're going to stick to our mantra that it's time to do news again. Okie doke, here we go. The list of questions we think you'll be asking tomorrow. Has the United States finally given up on its demand that Assad must go? What is a garage bar? And is it really a new community trend? And Victory Day in Moscow. Why is WW2 still so important to Russians? But let's go ahead and begin with the story that you will probably not see anywhere else. But it's a very important story, especially when you consider the money, the lives that have been lost in what has become one of the longest and bloodiest conflicts in decades. This revelation that the United States is now doing an about-face in Syria, it's a bit of a shocker. Here now with a look back at how Syria became the bloody mess that it is veteran journalist Ben Swan.
A major shift towards Syrian policy by the United States as the Trump administration now says that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad does not have to go. This is a major reversal of decades, or nearly a decade, of U.S. presidents and secretaries of state saying that Bashar al-Assad would have to be removed from power. During a virtual conference hosted by a Washington, D.C.-based Middle East think tank, President Trump's special envoy for Syria said that while Washington is still looking for radical changes in behavior in the Assad regime, the U.S. would no longer demand that Assad be removed from power.
The transition to democracy in Syria has begun, and it's time for Assad to get out of the way.
Ambassador James Jeffrey stated, quote, "We are not demanding total victory. We are not saying that Assad has to go. but added that Washington wants to see a dramatic shift in the behavior of this regime, as we have seen seldom in the world. His position is in stark contrast to U.S. positions in the past. In August of 2011, then President Barack Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton insisted that Assad must step down as the country found itself in the midst of a bloody civil war that would claim over 500,000 lives between 2011 and 2017. The U.S. wasn't alone, and calls for Assad's removal were backed by the UK, France, Germany, and the EU. Assad refused, and in 2014, the Obama administration went on to train approximately 15,000 rebels in Jordan with the intent of overthrowing Assad. That program was a failure, and the administration even admitted that only 4 or 5 of those 15,000 recruits even returned to Syria to fight Assad. By 2015, the Syrian war transformed from a civil war to a war between the Syrian government and factions of both al-Qaeda and ISIS. By the time the U.S. reached the presidential election of 2016, the fight over what to do with Assad was a major foreign policy topic. Former Secretary of State Clinton continued to call for direct U.S. military intervention, the bombing of Syrian airfields, and the removal of President Assad. Then candidate Trump said the U.S. should stay out of Syria, even as the Russian military worked with the Syrian government to corner and drive ISIS out of its strongholds. Which leads us to this new official position of the Trump administration, that Assad doesn't have to be removed from power. However, the administration is demanding significant changes in the way the regime conducts itself, including a new round of sanctions announced just last week that would target President Assad, his wife, and 39 new entities. For the News with Rick Sanchez, I'm Ben Swan.
For more on this, we're joined now by former Pentagon official Michael Maloof and George Galloway, who is a former UK MP. Michael, you worked at the Pentagon. Let me begin with you. Does it come across to you as a shocker to hear a U.S. envoy saying we no longer require regime change in Syria?
Well, I think it's an acknowledgement that they can't remove him through the means that they have. However, it's just a subterfuge. I know Jim Jeffrey, and he's a slippery dude. What they did was implement the Caesar Act, which in effect is designed to cripple the restructuring, the reconstruction of Syria, and not only just to aimed at immediate family members, but also any engineering, any energy, any reconstruction, anybody who wants to help Syria in that effort. It's all designed to ultimately bring him down. So it's all a subterfuge. So go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, maybe, George, I'll bring you into this, and I understand that. And by the way, what you're saying, I made some phone calls today on this story, and a lot of folks are agreeing with what you're saying, that, they're saying that, but they don't really mean it. George, I come from a profession where words do matter. And the fact that he's coming out and saying that Assad doesn't necessarily have to go anymore and that we're not necessarily looking for regime change, to me, that does have to have some kind of impact, no?
Yes, it's good of them to say so, but as Michael says, that's because they couldn't remove Bashar al-Assad, and 500,000 people had to leave their blood on the ground, in the sand, in the vain effort to remove him. It's an inglorious period. Don't beat yourselves up alone, because Britain every bit as culpable in this 500,000 dead people. What a mountain that is. And of course, using our proxies in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, all these people were involved in trying to destroy the secular Arab Republic of Syria, even if it meant putting in power the people that brought down the Twin Towers and killed thousands of Americans less than 20 years ago. Inglorious. We were the Air Force. We were the missile force of Al-Qaeda, and something even worse than Al-Qaeda, namely the ISIS excretion which crept across the region and then across the rest of the world. So it's not a chapter in history that we'll be able to look back on with any pride at all. And it's been an utter miserable failure, as well as an immoral mess.
Michael, let me put you on the hot spot on this story. Most Americans watching us right now have no earthly clue what's really going on in that country. They just know there's a bunch of factions fighting, and sometimes we're on one side, the Russians are on another side, and the Turks have now gotten in there. It's just too hard to keep score. In the end, would you recommend that we as a nation should just step aside in that conflict?
Well, first of all, we were never invited in as the Russians and the Iranians were by the government there. That's a legitimate government. Assad's government, whether we like Assad or not, he was voted in. He's recognized by the United Nations as the leader. We were never invited in. We are occupying the Northeast over the oil. We are blocking humanitarian. We are blocking efforts to get humanitarian aid into the country, notwithstanding what Jeffrey said, because the effect of U.S. sanctions, the Caesar Act, no one now wants to deal with Syria. So it's all a slippery slope, and it's all subterfuge, as I pointed out.
Good stuff, gentlemen. We appreciate the conversation. We'll follow it, but certainly some important words coming out of the mouth of Mr. Jeffries, as you call him, a slippery character, and the fact that the United States no longer is looking for Assad to step down. Thank you again.